Lisa, and this is my home office in the next day. So I'm going to show you a few things with Photoshop that we've also done yesterday. So let's start with making a new file. I have a lot of presets, but for you, print will probably be most relevant. Specifically A4, because you can just easily print that. It will be the right format and you can put it in your logbook. You will see that A4, this one, has the color mode RGB, which is for computers. Resolution is 300 pixels per inch, which is highly convenient because that's like made for print. The color mode is something you can always change. If you expand the presets, there's a lot more like possible print formats. Art and illustration is exactly what it sounds like. It's what they expect you to use when you make illustrations for posters or postcards or such. So let's open an A4 now. I like to put them in landscape when I work, just because that's a personal preference, but you can also have it in portrait mode. Alright, I've set my workspace to the default, the way you should see it as well. With workspace, I mean window, workspace. Essentials is default, but if we put it on painting, it changes. And you see that we have brushes on the left. These are the general brushes that you should have as well. We see layers here, we have a navigator, and the tools are easier to reach. So let's start with looking at layers. I've got my own tablet with my pen here. You see that there's a background. The background is locked. And every time I open a new document, the first thing I do is create a new layer that's not the background. Because the background is this big block of white, and that's really meant to be there and not to be used at all. So now when I draw something here, let's start. Very surprised chicken who has a book under its wing. Great, we did an art. But because layer 1 is a separate layer, I can easily move this around. So moving around is going to this arrow thingy. I use the V shortcut, and you can do anything with it. Now we talked about selecting it and creating a base layer underneath. So to make sure that works, I need to properly close it and make like a proper line art. Here you go, it should be closed on all sides. I use the wand tool to select around it. Then I go up to select, modify, expand. I personally have a shortcut for it because I use this a lot. Expand it by 5 pixels. And you see now that the selection is inside the line art. I select, invert. I go make a new layer, which I put underneath this chicken. And I fill it with the paint bucket tool. And there you're done. Now, as you saw, I had messy line art at first. And I'm just going to go back and show you the consequences of that. See, I removed all the nice layers now. But if I now use my wand tool, I select the inside of this chicken as well. Because it's not actually closed. Silly me. So that's removed. The other way to do this is to honestly just simply draw a new layer underneath and just use your brush to draw. So you can just trace it and take your time and do this in a nice way. Nicer than I am doing right now, clearly. Erase a bit on the side, because let's make this a good example. Let's put some effort into it. Then I use the paint bucket, fill it all, and honestly that also works. It's the less lazy answer to do things. So now we're going to create the colors on top, because I'm just using this base layer as that, a base. I create a new layer on top of it by using the plus button. And this layer, not you, is going to be a clipping mask. And you see here, the purpose of this clipping mask is that it's all clipped to the layer underneath. So I'm going to release the clipping mask now. Oh, no. Release clipping mask. And you see that it's a mess. But when we put the clipping mask back on, it just colors that. So I'm going to give this chicken some colors. Actually, I like it a bit more soft. Here we go. It's a green book, I've just decided. It has blue eyes. Let's give you cute blue eyes. And some dots, because some chickens have dots. There we go. What a good boy. We did it, kids. So now this is all just one layer. We're going to create another one. Give that a clipping mask as well. And this is going to be our shadow layer. I'm choosing just gray. And I'm going to shape some shadows. So I'm going to make these hard at first. Just whoop. If you want these to be softer, the blur tool is a challenge to use, but you can use it. But what I prefer is to use a filter, the Gaussian blur, and to blur out these shadows so they look more shadowy. Fun fact about the Gaussian blur, if I decide actually I only want this part to be blurred that way, I can. So I just selected that part with the lasso and I can blur just that part. Or I can take the biggest, softest brush I can find and gently go around the edge. Now I'm going back to my hard one. Now, this is all cute, but this is all gray. But when I put it on multiply, it creates one shadow layer that colors all the colors darker. So if color burn, darken, and it's worth to play around with the effects because sometimes one thing will look better to you than the other. And if it's a bit too dark, you change the opacity to go a bit lower because that's quite nice. And then on this layer, you can play around with it and erase what you think is too much to give this creature a little bit of shape. Now, if you're like me and you color pick to pick your colors, then you will find that if you use your eyedropper tool, this one is helped to use to find colors, you don't actually find the gray that you used in the color because the multiply layer changes this. So a little trick for that is you have the sample size and sample all layers. So that basically asks you where you want to pick the color from. But if I say I only want to pick the color from the current layer, that's when I tell the computer that I only wanted to get it from the multiply layer, then I actually get the gray that I used for this layer. So that can help you when you are trying to figure out what color you actually have in your multiply layer. And that's it for layers, I believe. Let's add a light one just so you can see another layer type. Let's have a look. Great clipping mask. So let's use a light blue because that's cute. And we put it in hard light. There we go, chicken with some light. Very cute. Now let's have a look at the brush mode together, because I chose a hard, round, pressure size brush, and that means that the pressure changes with my pen pressure. I can change the opacity, and that just means how hard I press on the brush. So as you see, the more I overlap, the darker it becomes. There's also a brush which just changes opacity depending on how hard I press on the screen, which is really convenient. And there are brushes that combine every single one of them. So it's worth playing around with that. If you worry about shaky hands, you can turn the smoothing that's up here up really high. And that means that it follows your brush more and that you can get less shaky layers. Use this sparingly, because if you use it too much, it gets a bit weird. And honestly, one of the things that impress me sometimes with really big artists is how they use no smoothing at all and get the straightest lines. But that's practice, and that's something they do every single day of their life. So I'm not on that level, and I don't have to be. So I think we've covered the things we talked about yesterday. So I'm going to group this chicken. So let's have all these layers, and I choose a group. Again, this group can be moved around. So here I use the move around tool. Look at that, I can put it anywhere. I can copy and paste it. So Ctrl C, Ctrl V, other places, convenient. And I can also within the Photoshop program copy paste it in a different file, which again is incredibly convenient. Let's see. Tools that I rarely use and actually don't are the pencil tool. I actually always use a brush tool and try to find a brush that works for it. You will have dry media brushes as well in your standard settings, and that has a tool that's, there you go, will look sort of like a pencil, and that's very fun to play with. And Photoshop itself has options to download a lot of brushes, but I believe that you're stuck with your standard options. So I hope this helps. I'm going to show you one last thing simply because that can help you a lot further on, and that's an adjustment layer. So you can adjust everything in a non-destructive way. Let's first do this destructively. And with destructive, I mean that it's just changed forever. So I've merged this chicken into one group. I can go to edit. No, correction, I go to image, adjustments, and I can change, for example, the hue and saturation. Here you go. So you change the color scheme of the chicken. I really often play with this because I just find that sometimes it's really fun and looks really good. There you go. I actually quite like this. So I quite like the setting. Chicken is changed, but it's changed forever. And if I want to undo it, I have to just go to a different one. But now we have this group for this chicken. I can go to layer and say I want an adjustment layer and say use saturation. And now you see in my layers that this is present here. And now I can change this any way I want. Remove it. And then if I say actually I don't want this, I can just unclick the layer. So if I click the eye, it's invisible. And that's super convenient if you want to just play around with what something looks like, especially if you go to modifying microscopy images later. Perhaps you want to see what a specific layer looks like, if it's blue or whatever. So you can put on your adjustment layer on a use saturation, or one of my favorite ones to use is the color balance. I really often go back in images afterwards and I make the shadows a little bit more blue and the highlights a little bit more yellow because I like the look of it. But you can do that for anything. And again, I can turn it on and off. And if I turn the hue and saturation on, I can click this and I can change it again later. And that type of versatility is really valuable. The only thing that I may want to do is make sure that it's clipped just to this group so that it doesn't change anything else but that group. Again, that's a choice. Perhaps you want it to be in front of an entire layer. So I hope this helps you, and good luck with the rest of your assessments.